Welcome back, symbol lovers, to another edition of Understanding the Symbols of Hieronymus Bosch. And this is part 3 in our series, The Deep Secret of Hieronymus Bosch, and we'll be looking at the knowledge of good and evil. But to make sure the cat is well out of the bag, I want to say that the deep secret of Hieronymus Bosch is that hidden in the garden of earthly delights is the formula for enlightenment or oneness with God. And this comes to us by way of the poem The Mustard Seed by Meister Eckhart. And you can think of the Garden of Earthly Delights as an illustration of that poem. The idea at the heart of the poem is a transformation, a metamorphosis, a profound personal change. And the symbol for such a change is the egg. And that's why there's an egg at the dead center of the Garden of Earthly Delights. So we'll begin where we left off with the last 3 verses of the Mustard Seed. And we will be considering both 6 and 7 together. And we will be comparing these 2 verses with the symbols Bosch uses on the outside panels, as well as the little pilgrim on the inside right panel. So let's jump right in. And 6, it is light, it is clear, it is totally dark, it is unnamed, it is unknown, free of beginning or end. It stands still, pure, unclothed, who knows its dwelling? Let him come forth and tell us what sort it is. Verse 7, become like a child, become deaf, become blind. Your own something must become nothing. Drive away all something, all nothing. Leave place, leave time, avoid even image. Go without a way on this narrow path, then you will find the desert's track. So, if we look at our Bosch symbols and compare them with the poem, what we find on the outside panel is a picture of something that's light as well as clear, and we have the total darkness of outer space and this unnamed, unknown continent we're looking at, and it stands pure and unclothed, and much of the same verses can apply to our pilgrim ascending the ladder in the inner right-hand panel. He is unnamed, unknown. We don't know what his beginning is or where his end will be. He is pure, he is unclothed, and who knows his dwelling? By using the Bible, we can easily tell that this man is a follower of Jesus. He's at least attempting it by looking at all his symbols combined. For instance, his shoes, his feet are shod with the good news of the kingdom. Jesus said his followers would be persecuted. We can see he's taken an arrow in the backside. He's carrying that staff over his shoulder, that walking stick. Jesus, that's symbolic. It's symbolic of the torture stake that Jesus said his followers would have to take up to follow him. And that jug is a symbol of spiritual thirst. He's in search of the living water of Jesus. He's got the pilgrim's mantle over his shoulders because he's traveling. He's going in search of, truth, because the truth will set you free. And he's got that mantle over his head because he's a student. He's studying. But he's on that straight and narrow path. He's following the teachings of Jesus. Also, he's naked because he's given all of his something to become nothing. And he's not left an image because he's got his back turned to us. We don't know what his face looks like or who he is. He has no image. By way of review, let's consider the symbols used in both the Garden of Earthly Delights and the poem The Mustard Seed. So beginning with verse 1, we have three beginnings. In the Garden of Earthly Delights, we have pictured three beginnings. Jesus, the beginning of all creation, Adam and Eve, the beginning of the human family, and on the outside panel, the world beginning again after being cleansed by the flood. So we have the rainbow covenant and a new beginning. And high above everything is the Word. And the Word is literally there for us, written across the top, high above everything. We have our Heavenly Father, and on his breast is the Word in the form of a book. And so verse 1 is pretty much completely covered. In verse 2, we have the two as the one source, and the three as one, symbolized by the duck at their feet. We also have the circle with the depth without ground in the form of the pond. And from verses 4 and 5, we have our symbolic mountain and our little marvelous symbolic desert. Illustrating verse 6, on the outside panels, we have a world that is both light and clear and surrounded by dark. It is unnamed, unknown, and it is pure. And something else that is unclothed and pure and walking in the light is the pilgrim. And to become a follower of Jesus, you must become like a child and pretty much give up everything so that your something becomes nothing, and get on the narrow path, and you will be persecuted. So be prepared for an arrow in the butt now and then. So all the mystical symbols written in the poem are meant to prepare our minds for the metamorphosis. So Bosch has pictured as much of the mustard seed as could possibly be pictured. The mustard seed is essentially a guided meditation. So let's review real quick the frame of mind that Eckhart is trying to prepare us for so we can make the big switch in the last verse. We can make things clearer by stripping out the actual symbols from the poems and looking at just the advice. In the beginning, high above understanding, so right out of the gate, understanding is beyond us. Do you understand why? No. Again, you're meant to draw a blank and leave it to understand itself. In verse 3, there is no understanding. In verse 4, ascend without activity, O intellect. So again, no intellect, no thinking. It stretches out immeasurably. If you can't measure it, don't bother to think about it. It can't be done. It is, and no one knows why. Again, don't think about it. It is in such a way that it is neither this nor that. So, again, blank. It is light, it is totally dark, free of beginning or end. Well, you can't hold both of those ideas of light and total dark in your mind at the same time, so that they tend to negate one another. It can't be done just by thinking of something in the material world that doesn't have a beginning and an end. Can't be done. And his last bit of advice is to become deaf, to become blind, and drive away all something. Well, again, he's obviously after a blank mind. He's saying, put your mind to rest, stop measuring things. In verse 7, we became a child and were on the narrow path. So now we can go on to the final verse 8. O my soul, go out, let God in. Sink all my something into God's nothing. Sink in the bottomless flood. If I flee from you, you come to me. If I lose myself, then I find you, O goodness above being. So let's again compare the symbols in the poem with the symbols on the altarpiece. So way up at the top we have God, and we have a bit of his nothingness around it. We also have, as close as we can get, to a bottomless flood. But finally, the position of God. He is the goodness above being. So those are the symbols, and that's the poem. And now I'll tell you what I think it all adds up. So first off, notice what Eckhart is taking away from you. Notice the negative. And that is understanding, analyzing things, reasoning things, measuring things. It's all anti-intellect. So if you take all those things away, what do you have left? And that is your intuition. Your intuition knows things without reasoning. It's almost as if God were telling you what to do. You simply need to listen to your intuition. And this is the metamorphosis at the heart of the Garden of Earthly Delights. This is the change in thinking from the intellect to the intuition that brings about the grand spiritual change. So all these symbols and all this mystical language is talking around the theological subject of the knowledge of good and evil. Mystics like Eckhart and Bosch wanted to know how to nullify it, reverse it, and replace it with something more akin to the original mind of Adam and Eve, one that would be at one with God. So it was natural for the mystics to focus on the knowledge, to figure out what it was and how to undo it. It's the logical turning point in the Bible. Before the knowledge of good and evil, there was peace with God, there was oneness with God. With the coming of the knowledge of good and evil, we suddenly have self-deception, shame, guilt, fear, all these terrible negative things, and we have real evil in the world. There's still soon violence and murder. Jesus seemed to be the one with the insight to become one with God, so they studied the words of Jesus. A good example of this is from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus teaches why we should love our enemies. And that is because, he says, our Father in heaven causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. In other words, we are not to measure people by the standards of good and evil, making them neighbors or enemies, because God doesn't. This isn't God's mindset. He doesn't measure them. He doesn't judge them. He continues to love neighbor and enemy alike. If you follow the principle Jesus laid out in the Sermon on the Mount, you don't need the prophets or the law to define what is good and evil. You can go by what is within you in your own heart. And these are a few more of the sayings of Jesus, where if you compare what we've been talking about so far with what he's saying, you see that he's eliminating the idea of judging. You can't even judge him, Jesus, as good. No one is to judge, no one is to measure, no one needs to use their intellect, just their intuition, just their gut feelings. And if it all sounds a little like Zen Buddhism to you, that's because it is very much like Zen Buddhism, just sprung from a different culture. So the formula for oneness with God is the deep secret of Hieronymus Bosch and the Garden of Earthly Delights. There are many more, but that's all we have time for on Understanding the Symbols of Hieronymus Bosch. Thanks for watching.